Welcome to the Hórus Audiobook channel. Don't forget to subscribe for more fascinating content.
Azazel. Chapter 1: The Call. The city never fully slept. It merely drowned in an intermediate state between exhaustion and denial. There was something in the air that night. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the silence. It was a presence. Alessàndrho noticed it even before opening his eyes. An invisible weight hovered over the room, as if space itself had become denser, thicker, almost breathable. The digital clock read 3:17, a time he was beginning to recognize not as chance, but as recurrence. He didn't remember when it had started. Maybe weeks. Maybe months. Or maybe it had always been there, waiting. He sat up slowly in bed, running a hand over his face. His body was still tired, but his mind, too awake. As if he had been pulled from a dream that didn't want to be forgotten. And then came the image. A desert. Vast. Silent. Ancient. There was no sun, yet everything was visible. The sand didn't move, yet it seemed alive, as if hiding something beneath its surface. On the horizon, a dark shape rose, indistinct, impossible to focus on. He squeezed his eyes shut. But the image didn't disappear. "You were called." The voice didn't come from the room. It came from within. Or from somewhere deeper than thought itself. Alessàndrho opened his eyes, gasping. His heart raced. The silence of the apartment now felt artificial, like a poorly sustained stage. He got up and walked to the window. The city was still there. Lights. Buildings. Distant movement. Everything normal. Too normal. He no longer trusted that. In recent days, small details had begun to fail, like invisible cracks in the structure of the real. Shadows that lingered a second too long. Reflections that didn't quite match. Dreams that left residue. And symbols. Always the symbols. He saw them in places they shouldn't exist. Scrawled on walls. Marked on old papers. Even, and this deeply disturbed him, unconsciously drawn by his own hand. Curving lines. Broken shapes. A recurring pattern. A sigil. That night, he didn't try to ignore it. He turned slowly, walking to the table where his notebooks lay scattered. Pages filled with disconnected notes, fragments of thoughts, drawings he didn't remember making. He opened one. And there it was. The symbol again. More precise this time. More intentional. As if it were being perfected. His fingers touched the paper hesitantly. And then, a sensation. Not physical, but real. As if something, somewhere, had noticed the contact. The air in the room changed. There was no wind, but something moved. Subtle. invisible, watching. Alessàndrho pulled his hand back. He took a deep breath. This was no longer just fatigue, nor stress, nor imagination. There was a pattern, and patterns mean intention. He closed the notebook forcefully, as if he could contain it all inside. But it was already too late. Because in that instant, he understood something that could not be ununderstood. This wasn't happening to him. He was being led. Back in bed, sleep did not come. Only fragments. Disconnected images. Sand. Silence. And, for the first time, something clearer. A figure. Tall. Motionless. With something like horns, or perhaps just distorted shadows. It did not approach. It did not speak. But it was waiting. And in some disturbing way, Alessàndrho knew. This was not the beginning. It was the return. Chapter 2: The Signal. The day dawned without truly dawning. The light coming through the window did not warm, did not illuminate, it merely revealed. As if its only function was to expose what had, until then, remained hidden on the margins of perception. Alessàndrho didn't remember having slept. He got up with a sense of continuity, as if the night were still happening behind the appearances of the day. His body moved, but there was a subtle delay between intention and action, as if something within him were misaligned. He walked to the bathroom. His reflection waited. For a moment he hesitated. There was no apparent reason. And yet there was. He approached the mirror slowly. His face was there, familiar, intact, but his eyes were not. There was too much depth in them, as if something had been opened. Something that could never be closed again. He looked away. He washed his face. Cold water. Real. Tangible. But the feeling did not pass. Something had crossed through, and remained. Chapter 3: The Ritual. Night fell like a thick veil over the apartment. Alessàndrho could no longer ignore the symbol. It was present in his thoughts, in his dreams, and even in the involuntary movements of his hand. Before the open notebook, he began to carefully trace the lines of the sigil. Each curve seemed to awaken something ancient within him. The air grew heavy. Improvised candles were lit around the table. The silence of the apartment took on a ritualistic density. Then he spoke words he didn't remember learning. And something answered. A presence. Not monstrous, but conscious. A hidden intelligence watching through the darkness. You finally opened it. The voice arose inside his mind. In that instant, Alessàndrho understood that the ritual was not an invocation. It was a recognition. Chapter 4: The Crossing. The dreams became continuous. The desert returned every night. Now there were black structures emerging from the sand and symbols carved on impossible stones. Alessàndrho walked among them like one being guided. In the center of the desert, a figure watched. Tall, motionless, horns formed from distorted shadows. When the presence finally spoke, the dream itself seemed to shudder. You have crossed the first door. The awakening was violent. The symbol was drawn on the apartment wall, but he didn't remember doing it. Chapter 5: The Voiceless Voice. Silence was no longer empty. It was occupied, dense, full of something that did not need to manifest to exist. Alessàndrho closed his eyes and immediately heard the presence. Now you listen. The voice had no direction, no sound. It existed directly within consciousness. Then the entity revealed something essential. I did not corrupt. I revealed. The understanding hit Alessàndrho brutally. Azazel was not just a demon. He was an opening, an intelligence associated with the awakening of forbidden perceptions. Chapter 6: The First Operation. The symbol ceased to be a mystery. It became a tool. Alessàndrho sat before the notebook and began to mentally reproduce each line of the sigil. The environment responded. A glass on the table vibrated slightly. Then it moved. Reality had reacted to intention. But there was a cost. The glass cracked immediately upon contact. Every alteration requires compensation. Azazel's voice echoed through his mind. In that moment, Alessàndrho realized. He wasn't learning magic. He was learning structural interaction. Chapter 7: The Price. After the operation, everything began to fail. Sounds out of sync. Delayed reflections. Constant sensations of being watched. The world seemed slightly displaced. Then the message arrived. An unknown number sent only one image. The symbol. Exactly the same. You have opened a point, Azazel explained. And points connect. Alessàndrho realized he was not alone. Other consciousnesses had crossed before him. Chapter 8: The Others. The presences began to appear. Strange reflections. People watching him on the streets. Whispers coming from the darkness. Then a new message appeared on his phone. An address. And below. You have already been seen. That same night, Alessàndrho heard voices in the apartment hallway. 3 figures appeared momentarily in the darkness. Motionless. Watching. Azazel explained. Those who touched, but remained incomplete. The echoes. People fragmented by the crossing. Chapter 9: The Frequency. The sounds increased. Now Alessàndrho heard layers hidden beneath the world's silence. Whispers, transmissions, consciousnesses. Then the first collective contact occurred. He saw a circular room occupied by 7 people around the symbol. They all looked directly at him. "You hear the frequency now," the woman with black eyes spoke. It was then that Alessàndrho understood. Symbols do not represent forces. They tune forces. Chapter 10. The Second Opening. The symbol began to appear spontaneously in reality. On walls, in dust, in reflections. Then Alessàndrho crossed again. The desert returned. But now there were hundreds of marked figures wandering among black monoliths, all connected to the structure. And above them, something colossal watched. The woman approached. The first opening reveals. The second connects. Upon returning to the apartment, 3 knocks echoed on the door. A male voice whispered, "We know you crossed." Chapter 11. The Door. The figures outside weren't trying to enter. They were trying to synchronize. The symbol began to grow across the apartment walls like black roots. Azazel commanded, "Close the point." But it was too late. A gigantic presence was approaching beyond reality. Then Alessàndrho understood something terrifying. Azazel was not the top of the structure. He was merely a door. Chapter 12. That Which Watches. The door opened slowly. A man with completely black eyes appeared in the gap. Behind him, the woman from the desert watched in silence. They revealed the truth. Entire civilizations had touched fragments of the structure throughout history. Religions, occultism, myths. All were attempts at contact. Then the colossal presence finally answered. Not in words, but in meaning. The opening has been accepted. Chapter 13. The Living Structure. There was no longer any floor, nor sky, nor direction. Alessàndrho floated within the structure like a consciousness suspended between impossible layers of reality. The concept of space had ceased to function there. Everything existed simultaneously, distant and close, internal and external, still and pulsating. And yet, there was order. Infinite lines crossed the darkness. Not physical lines. Connections. Each one vibrated with something akin to consciousness. Thousands. Perhaps millions. Some shone brightly. Others were nearly extinguished. Many seemed damaged. And all led to the same invisible center. Alessàndrho tried to understand what he was seeing. He failed immediately. The structure could not be understood rationally, only experienced. Then he felt it. Something approaching. Not through space, but through attention. The structure itself began to react to the presence of that colossal consciousness. The lines vibrated simultaneously, like strings tensioned by an immeasurable force. And then, Azazel appeared, or something close to it. There was no defined form, just a silhouette built from shadow, dark fire, and unstable geometries. Horns appeared and disappeared like symbolic fragments trying to assume meaning. But now, Alessàndrho could perceive the truth. That was not Azazel's form. It was merely the form his mind could withstand. "You have seen beyond the barrier." The voice echoed directly through the structure. Heavier. More real. "Now she sees you." The word she carried something no other term could sustain. Not identity. Not gender. Scale. Alessàndrho tried to look up again. Azazel immediately interrupted. "No." The entire structure reacted to the command. The lines vibrated violently. "Human perception has limits." "And you have already exceeded several." But it was too late. Because now Alessàndrho could feel the presence constantly. Immense. Pulsing beyond reality. Like an intelligence distributed through existence itself. That precedes interpretation. The structure's lines began to move slowly around them. Fragments emerged. Vanished civilizations. Forgotten rituals. Symbols carved into ancient bones. Men going mad after looking at the sky. Everything connected. Everything part of the same network. Symbols were never worship. They were always interface. The understanding hit Alessàndrho brutally. Religions. Occultism. Rituals. All attempts at contact. All attempts at tuning. And some things answered. The horror was not in the existence of the structure. It was in the perception that it had always been here. Watching through human consciousness from the very beginning. "I was an opening," Azazel stated. "As are you." The lines vibrated violently. "But unlike you, I crossed completely." Alessàndrho felt the void grow within his mind. The perception came slowly. Terrible. Azazel was not merely an entity. Once, he was something lesser. Every consciousness connected to the structure eventually chooses, Azazel stated, to dissolve or to return fragmented. The figures from the desert appeared in Alessàndro's mind immediately. The incomplete ones, the echoes, those who heard beyond the limit. I chose to keep seeing. Then, the entire structure froze. All lines stopped simultaneously. Azazel raised his head slowly, as if he had perceived something. Horror shot through Alessàndro immediately. because he also perceived it. The colossal presence was approaching. Directly. The structure began to pulse violently. Thousands of connected consciousnesses reacted at once. Some screaming, others praying, others going mad instantly. Azazel looked at Alessàndro, and for the first time, there was something close to fear in his voice. She has never watched so early. The space above them began to open, not as a portal, as perception breaking limits. And then Alessàndro saw. Not completely. Never completely. But enough. Eyes. Countless. Opening within the very structure of reality. Watching. And a thought crossed his mind with absolute violence. She was waking up. Chapter 14. The Eyes Open. The eyes remained open within the structure. Immense. Infinite. They didn't just watch Alessàndro, they watched everything simultaneously. Every thought. Every memory. Every fragment of perception. He tried to look away. Impossible. The presence didn't occupy space. It occupied consciousness. And now it was inside his. The entire structure began to vibrate like a living organism awakening after eons of dormancy. The luminous lines pulsed violently around Alessàndro, transmitting waves of incomprehensible information. Fragments crossed his mind at impossible speed. Civilizations buried under ancient deserts. Rituals performed in subterranean temples. Men tearing out their own eyes after contemplating forbidden symbols. Voices speaking languages that didn't belong to Earth. And then, pain. An absurd pressure took over his head. Alessàndro fell to his knees inside the structure, or what his mind interpreted as knees. Azazel appeared before him again, unstable, as if even his form were being affected by the approach of that colossal presence. Don't try to understand. His voice seemed distant now. Distorted. Like a signal crossing interference. The human mind breaks trying to organize what exists beyond causality. The eyes continued opening. More and more. Each one different. Some human. Others impossible. Living geometries watching through reality itself. Then Alessàndro noticed something worse. The eyes didn't belong to the entity. The entire structure was the entity. And those connected consciousnesses were cells. The horror came as an inevitable revelation. Azazel watched the exact moment Alessàndro understood. Now you see. The structure pulsed violently. Thousands of voices echoed simultaneously. Some begging. Others worshipping. Others going mad in real time. Then Alessàndro heard one of them clearly. A female voice. Close. Familiar. Come back. Everything froze. The voice crossed through the structure like an impossible rupture. Azazel immediately turned to the void. For the first time, His form seemed alarmed. "She found you." "Who?" But the answer came before. A new presence emerged between the lines of the structure. Different. Silent. Not monstrous. And precisely because of that, more disturbing. The woman from the desert slowly emerged between the luminous connections. Her completely black eyes remained fixed on him. But now Alessàndro could see her correctly. Her body wasn't entirely stable. Parts of her disappeared for microseconds, like someone partially disconnected from reality. "You've stayed here too long." Her voice was calm, too human for that place. "If you keep looking, the structure will begin to replace you." Azazel remained silent, which somehow was worse. Alessàndro tried to stand. The space around him immediately responded to his movement, rippling like dark water. Nothing there obeyed matter. Everything obeyed perception. "Who are you?" The woman stared at him for long seconds, then answered, "Someone who returned." The phrase hit Alessàndro with violence, because he immediately perceived the hidden meaning. She had crossed completely, and managed to return. Something Azazel never did, or never wanted to do. The eyes inside the structure began to move again, now focused on her. The woman slowly closed her own eyes. "She doesn't like interruptions." The structure reacted immediately. The lines began to writhe violently, like exposed nerves. Azazel approached Alessàndro. His form became increasingly unstable, fragmented. "You need to wake up." "What if I can't?" For the first time, Azazel hesitated, only for an instant. "Then she will complete the connection." The entire structure shook. The eyes began to open faster. Cracks appeared in the very void around them, and something began to cross through. Not form, not matter, presence. A consciousness so vast that its mere approach made the structure's lines collapse. Alessàndro heard thousands of echoes screaming simultaneously. The connected consciousnesses were being consumed by the approach, absorbed, reintegrated. Then the woman held his face with both hands, her black eyes fixed on his. "Listen." The world went silent instantly. "When you wake up, do not open the door." The phrase echoed inside him. Once, twice, 3 times. Then everything collapsed. The structure disappeared. The eyes vanished. Azazel dissolved into the darkness, and Alessàndro woke violently on the floor of his apartment, gasping, sweating, his heart racing beyond normal. The apartment was dark, silent, but something was different, something deeply wrong, because someone was knocking on the door. 3 slow, precise knocks. Thump, 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 and then a female voice whispered from the other side, "You took too long to come back." Chapter 15. The Woman Outside. The silence after the voice was worse than the knocks. Alessàndrho remained motionless on the apartment floor, feeling his own heart pulse violently within his chest. The knocks returned. Slow, rhythmic, as if whoever was outside knew exactly the effect they were causing. The woman's phrase from within the structure crossed his mind again. "When you wake up, do not open the door." He stood slowly. The apartment seemed smaller now, darker. The walls carried shadows that weren't there before. And the symbol was everywhere, drawn on the walls, on the ceiling, on the living room mirror, even on the floor beneath his feet. But something was different about the lines. They seemed to pulse, like living circuits breathing in the dimness. Thump, thump, thump. The voice returned. Closer. "I know you can hear me." Alessàndrho approached the door slowly. Each step made the air seem heavier. The peephole was completely dark. Not because of lack of light outside, but because something was blocking it. Something motionless. Waiting. "Azazel didn't explain everything to you." The female voice carried a strange tranquility. There was no direct threat in it. And precisely because of that, it was disturbing. "He never explains." Alessàndrho felt the presence immediately. Azazel was there. Not visible, but occupying the apartment like invisible smoke. "Step away from the door." The voice arose inside his mind, deeper than before. Unstable. As if maintaining contact was requiring effort. "She no longer belongs to the surface." Outside, the woman let out a soft laugh. Low. Almost sad. "Surface. You still use that term." The building's hallway seemed to change. Alessàndrho heard distant sounds coming from beyond the door. Not footsteps. Something like multiple voices whispering at once. Like a crowd speaking underwater. Then, the peephole cleared for a second, and he saw her. The woman from the desert. Motionless before the door. Her dark hair fell partially over her face. Her black eyes seemed too deep, and her skin wasn't entirely stable. Small distortions ran across her appearance like flaws in reality. She tilted her head slightly, as if she knew he was looking, and smiled. There was no malice in that smile. There was recognition. "You can already feel it, can't you?" Azazel appeared behind Alessàndrho instantly. His form made of shadows oscillated violently. "Do not answer." The apartment's temperature dropped abruptly. The lights began to flicker. The woman remained motionless outside. "She is waking up faster this time." The following silence was absolute. Even Azazel seemed to react. "This time?" The woman slowly closed her eyes. When she spoke again, her voice seemed to cross layers of reality. "Do you think you're the first?" The question destroyed something inside Alessàndro, because a part of him already knew the answer. The symbols, the echoes, the fragmented consciousnesses. It had all been happening for a very long time. Long before he was born. Long before the city itself existed. How many? The question came out before he realized it. Azazel immediately turned to him. Rage. For the first time there was real rage in his presence. "Don't listen to her." But the woman answered anyway. "Countless." The hallway darkened beyond the door. The apartment walls began to vibrate slowly. The symbol pulsed beneath the floor. And Alessàndro felt it. Something below the building. Very deep. Like a subterranean frequency awakening. The woman slowly raised her hand. On her fingertips were marks identical to the sigil, but deformed. Older. More complete. "She is looking for a stable opening." Azazel lunged violently at the door. The entire apartment structure shook. Silence. The woman remained calm. "You know you can't stop it." Then she looked directly at Alessàndro through the peephole. And in that instant, he saw. Not the hallway. Not the building. But something else. An impossible landscape hidden behind reality. Black monoliths. A sky filled with gigantic eyes. And thousands of human figures walking slowly toward a colossal opening pulsing on the horizon. The vision lasted less than a second. But it was enough. Alessàndro fell backward, gasping. Blood slowly ran from his nose. Azazel approached immediately. "She has marked your perception." Outside, the woman stepped back. The hallway lights began to die one by one. Darkness consuming distance. "They have already felt you." "Who?" But she didn't answer immediately. She just watched the apartment in silence. Like someone listening to something distant. Then, she smiled again. Only this time there was fear in that smile. Real fear. Those who live behind the eyes. And the hallway lights went out completely. The entire building plunged into darkness. Then came the sounds. Many. Footsteps. Slowly climbing the building's stairs. Chapter 16. The Ascent. The footsteps were not hurried. And that was the worst part. They were measured, organized, as if each step was measured with surgical precision by something that was in no rush at all to arrive. Thump. 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 But now they no longer came from the door. They came from inside the building. Alessàndrho remained motionless on the living room floor, feeling his entire body lose its sense of direction. The apartment seemed to spin slowly, as if the concept of up was beginning to fail. Azazel remained near the door, but he no longer advanced. That too was new. They shouldn't be here yet. His voice came low, fragmented. Alessàndrho tried to get up, but his legs didn't respond immediately. It was as if gravity was delayed. Thump, thump, thump. Now closer. Second floor. Third. The entire building seemed empty, but the sounds proved otherwise. Something was climbing without using space as humans use it. The woman outside no longer spoke. Her silence was different now. Observant. As if she was listening too. Then her voice returned, but not through the door. Directly inside his mind. They have found the frequency of your point. Alessàndrho pressed his hands against his temples. What are they? Azazel answered before her. Residues. Consciousnesses that couldn't complete the crossing, but also didn't return. The building creaked, like old wood being bent from within. Thump, thump, thump. Fifth floor. Now they were very close. Very close. The apartment's light failed completely. But the darkness was not uniform. It had texture, depth. And within it, something began to form. Silhouettes. First one. Then two. Then several. They weren't inside the apartment. Yet. But they were close enough to be perceived through the flaws in reality. Alessàndrho retreated to the wall. The symbol beneath his feet began to glow faintly, as if responding to the approach. Azazel turned to him. They didn't come for you. Silence. They came for what you opened. Thump. 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 Seventh floor. Now the sound was on the same level. In the hallway. The apartment door handle began to vibrate on its own. It didn't turn. Yet. But it was being tested. As if something on the other side was learning the mechanism. The woman finally spoke again. But her voice was different. Less stable. They are not complete. But they are not empty either. Alessàndrho looked at the door. Then what are they? She took time to answer. When she answered, it was almost a whisper. Attempts at continuity. Azazel advanced one step. And then stopped. As if he had felt something change. The apartment's structure responded. The walls began to breathe slowly. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. The symbol on the floor expanded slightly. And with that, the footsteps stopped. Absolute silence. For 3 whole seconds. And then, a single impact. Not of a step, but of arrival. Thump. The door cracked. It didn't open, but it yielded, as if something had leaned against the other side with enough force to test not the wood, but the concept of separation. The woman whispered, almost voiceless, "Now they know exactly where you are." Azazel looked at Alessàndro, and this time there was no command, only warning. "If they open that door, it won't be an entrance. It will be equivalence." The symbol beneath the floor began to slowly rise up the walls, as if the apartment was being rewritten from within. Thump. Louder. Now the door was no longer being tested. It was being understood. And then, a voice arose from the other side. Not the woman's. Not Azazel's. Not from his mind. Something new. Multiple. Overlapped. "We remember you." Alessàndro froze. Azazel closed his eyes. And for the first time since the beginning of everything, he seemed absolutely certain of something. "They are not climbing. They are returning." The door began to slowly sink inward. Chapter 17. Equivalence. The door didn't break. It yielded. Slowly. As if matter was forgetting its own rigidity. The wood sank into the apartment in absolute silence, deforming like flesh pressed by invisible fingers. Alessàndro couldn't breathe properly. The air had become too dense. Heavy. Alive. The symbol spread across the walls, pulsed in sync with something beyond the building. Beyond the city. Beyond ordinary reality itself. Azazel remained motionless before the deformed door. His form oscillated violently, unstable like a transmission about to disappear. "Don't look directly at them when they enter." The phrase came quickly. Urgent. Perception creates alignment. Thump. The door sank a few more centimeters. On the other side, there was no longer a hallway. Darkness had replaced space. Not absence of light. Absence of structure. Something was there, waiting for the exact moment to cross completely. Then the multiple voice returned. Closer. Clearer. "You have opened continuity." Alessàndro felt pain immediately. Not physical. Something worse. Memories began to surge in violent flashes within his mind. Unknown faces. Ancient temples. Men drawing symbols with their own blood. Eyes watching through the sky. And then, he saw himself. But not himself. Another version. Wearing old clothes, kneeling before a black monolith covered in the same sigils. The vision disappeared instantly. Alessàndro staggered backward. "What was that?" Azazel didn't answer immediately, and his silence brought more fear than any answer. "The structure doesn't perceive time as you do. Connections can cross eras." Thump. The door yielded more. Now there was a dark gap wide enough for something to look back. And something was looking. Alessàndrho felt it immediately. Multiple consciousnesses pressed against the opening, trying to synchronize, trying to enter. But there was still a barrier. Weak, almost non-existent. The woman from the desert appeared again before the door. Not outside. Inside the apartment. As if she had crossed without using any space. Her body. Fragments of her disappeared for entire seconds before returning. She looked directly at Azazel. "You should have ended the cycle when you realized." Azazel answered without taking his attention from the gap. There was still a possibility of stabilization. She almost smiled. Almost. "You still believe that?" The multiple voice from the other side began to laugh. Not a human laugh. Something choral. Thousands of voices reacting together. The entire building structure shook. Then, hands began to emerge through the gap. But they weren't normal hands. They were too long. Extra joints bent in impossible ways. The skin seemed made of liquid shadow pulsing slowly. Alessàndrho retreated immediately. But there was something worse. The hands weren't trying to grab anything. They were touching the apartment's air like blind people trying to recognize an ancient environment. "They remember the surface," the woman whispered. One of the hands slowly stopped, turning toward Alessàndrho. And then, all the fingers pointed at him simultaneously. The multiple voice echoed again. "The bearer." The entire apartment went out. Sound, light, temperature. Everything disappeared for an absolute instant. And Alessàndrho saw. Not with his eyes. With something deeper. The true structure behind the building. Gigantic lines crossed the entire city beneath the ground. Connecting people. Places. Hidden symbols. Like a network buried under human reality. And the apartment was just one of the points. A node. An active opening. Then he noticed something even worse. Other points were awakening simultaneously across the city. Many. Like lights turning on in the darkness. The woman looked directly at him. For the first time there was real urgency in her expression. "She has begun to expand." Azazel turned slowly. "How many points?" She answered in a low voice. "More than last time." Horror crossed Alessàndrho. "Last time?" Silence. Long. Heavy. Then Azazel answered. "You called them lost civilizations." Reality shook. The hands began to cross the gap more quickly. Now entire arms emerged from the darkness. Impossible limbs writhing into the apartment. The multiple voice became stronger. Closer. Hungrier. "Open completely." Alessàndrho felt the symbol burning under his feet. And then he realized. The door wasn't being opened by the beings from the other side. It was responding to him. Chapter 18. The Bearer. The symbol burned. Not on the skin. in consciousness. Alessàndrho fell to his knees when the perception finally hit him completely. The door was connected to him. Every knock, every crack, every opening in reality. Everything reacted to his presence. The hands crossing the gap trembled simultaneously when he understood this, as if perception itself functioned as authorization. No, Azazel advanced immediately. But it was too late. The symbol beneath the apartment pulsed violently. An invisible wave crossed the entire building. The walls deformed. The ceiling breathed. And for an impossible instant, Alessàndrho heard voices coming from other apartments. Screams. People waking up. Crying. Praying. Because something was crossing the city through the awakened points. The woman approached quickly, her black eyes fixed on him. Stop looking at the opening. But Alessàndrho couldn't. The gap in the door now seemed infinite. Much larger inside than it should be. An impossible space existed beyond it. And within that void, movement. Thousands of forms walking slowly in the darkness. Some human, others not. All coming in the same direction. The multiple voice echoed again. Clearer. More organized. The bearer remembers. Images invaded his mind instantly. Not dreams. Memories. An ancient city built around a colossal symbol. Priests looking at the sky as something opened above them. People voluntarily offering their own consciousness to the structure. And at the center of everything, the same sigil. Always the same. Alessàndrho held his head, gasping. This has happened before. Azazel remained silent, which confirmed everything. The woman answered slowly. Many times. The entire apartment shook violently. One of the hands finally crossed the gap completely. It touched the apartment floor, and the floor immediately rotted around the point of contact. Not physical decomposition. Something worse. Reality forgot how to remain solid. The hand began to pull the rest of the body. Azazel raised his form like dark fire. For the first time, Alessàndrho felt true violence coming from him. You will not cross. The black lines around the apartment exploded into motion. The symbols on the walls spun like living mechanisms. The creature on the other side partially retreated. But the multiple voice only answered. You are no longer guardian. Silence. Even Azazel hesitated. And Alessàndrho realized. That was true. Azazel once belonged to the other side. Perhaps he always had. The woman immediately turned to Alessàndrho. Listen carefully. The building structure began to emit deep metallic sounds, like something gigantic moving beneath the foundations. You can still stop the equivalents. How? She looked at the door, then at him, and for the first time, there was real fear in her black eyes. By closing the point from within, the meaning hit Alessàndrho immediately. The desert. The structure. the eyes. He would have to cross again. Azazel realized in the same instant. No. The word made the entire apartment shake. He will not survive another complete crossing. The woman answered without looking away. Then no one will survive. More hands emerged through the opening. Now dozens. Touching walls, ceiling, floor, learning the surface. The multiple voice became almost intelligible. The structure awakens. Then something changed. All the hands froze simultaneously. Azazel also noticed. The woman stepped back, and horror took over the entire apartment, because a new presence had emerged beyond the gap. Much larger, much older. The creature's arms immediately retracted, like animals fearing something superior. Even the multiple voice went silent. And then, a single eye opened in the darkness behind the door. Gigantic, motionless, watching Alessàndrho directly. The reality around began to bleed shadows. Azazel whispered, "She has found the bearer." The eye blinked slowly, and Alessàndrho heard the voice. Not through his ears, directly into his soul. A single phrase. "Do you remember me?" Chapter 19. Before the first name. The question remained within him, not as sound, as infection. "Do you remember me?" Alessàndrho tried to breathe, but the very air seemed to have been removed from the apartment. Everything around him slowed violently. The shadows dripping down the walls. The symbols pulsing on the ceiling. The hands withdrawn behind the gap. Everything had stopped, as if reality itself was waiting for his answer. The gigantic eye remained open beyond the door. Motionless. Ancient. There was no emotion in it. Neither anger, nor compassion. Only absolute recognition. And that was worse. Azazel slowly retreated. For the first time since the beginning, his form seemed smaller. Not physically. Hierarchically. The woman from the desert remained motionless. Her black eyes now reflected something akin to resignation. Like someone witnessing an inevitable event happen again. "Don't answer," Azazel whispered. But Alessàndrho could barely hear him. Because something was happening inside his mind. Memories began to surface. Not flashes. Complete sequences. He saw an impossible city under a red sky without stars. Black towers erected around a colossal abyss. Thousands of people walking voluntarily into giant symbols carved into the ground. Singing, smiling, as if they were part of an incomprehensible purpose. And at the center of that city, him. Not exactly Alessàndrho, but someone wearing his face. Dark robes. His hands covered in the same sigils. Watching the sky open. The vision intensified brutally. He felt the heat of that place. The metallic smell in the air. the sound of thousands of voices pronouncing a name that the human mind could not sustain. Then the memory advanced. The opening in the sky began. Eyes appeared above the city. Countless. And the people celebrated, rejoiced, because they believed they were witnessing ascension. But something went wrong. Terribly wrong. The symbols began to collapse. The structure's lines lost stability. The people began to change. Bodies deforming in silence. Consciousnesses merging. Faces disappearing into pulsating masses of living shadow. The entire city became a single maddened organism. And at the center, the figure with Alessàndro's face looked directly at something beyond the opening. Something so vast that the memory began to fail trying to reproduce it. Then came the phrase. The same voice as now. The same presence. You opened before time. Alessàndro awoke from the memory violently. Or perhaps he had plunged deeper into it. The apartment returned to focus. The eyes still watched. Azazel now seemed desperate. She is using your structural memories. The woman finally spoke again. Softly. Almost sadly. They aren't memories. Silence. They are residues of continuity. Horror crossed Alessàndro immediately. Those were not past lives, nor reincarnation. It was worse. The structure reused conscious patterns. He was not unique. He was recurrent. A bearer repeated over countless cycles. The perception destroyed something inside him. The symbol on the floor flashed violently. And then the entire apartment changed. The walls disappeared for an instant. The building ceased to exist. The city became transparent. And Alessàndro saw. Gigantic lines crossed all of Manaus beneath the surface. Thousands of them. Pulsing slowly. Connecting hospitals. Churches. Old buildings. Cemeteries. Sleeping people. Points. Potential openings. Some already active. Others beginning to awaken now. The colossal voice echoed again. The structure remembers you. Azazel advanced. Violent shadows exploded around him. He no longer belongs to the cycle. The eye moved slowly toward Azazel. And for the first time, absolute fear crossed his presence. Because the entity answered only with silence. A silence so heavy that the very structure of the apartment began to crack. The woman held Alessàndro by the arms. You need to decide now. Decide what? She brought her face close to his. And her black eyes finally showed something human. Pain. Whether you will close the structure or finish opening it completely. Then the eye blinked again. And this time, Alessàndro saw what existed behind it. Not a creature, not a dimension, but an intelligence distributed across countless simultaneous realities. The eyes were merely points of contact, and the structure was its nervous system. The shock was so brutal that blood ran from Alessàndro's ears. The entire city shook. Outside, alarms began to go off simultaneously. Dogs barked madly. People screamed in neighboring apartments. Because something gigantic was beginning to cross the limits of collective human perception. And then, Alessàndro's phone lit up by itself on the table. A single message appeared on the screen. No number. No origin. Just a phrase. Find the first gate. Chapter 20. The First Gate. The message remained glowing on the phone screen. Find the first gate. The letters pulsed slowly, like an electronic heart connected to the structure itself. Alessàndro stared at the device, unable to move. The apartment remained unstable. The walls breathed. The symbols moved beneath the paint. Shadows traversed the ceiling like living organisms hiding between layers of reality. And the eye beyond the door remained open. Watching. Always watching. Azazel approached the phone immediately. His form oscillated violently upon seeing the message. No. The word came laden with something rare in him. Fear. The woman from the desert also looked at the screen. And for the first time since she had appeared, she paled. She has never called someone so early. Alessàndro slowly raised his gaze. What is the first gate? Silence. Too long. The entire building shook again. Outside, metallic sounds echoed through the city streets. Accidents. Screams. Breaking glass. Manaus was beginning to feel the effects of the opening. Azazel answered first. The original point. The first stable interface created between the structure and human perception. The woman completed in a low voice. The place where everything began. The phone vibrated again. New message. Before sunrise. Then the screen went dark. The eye behind the door slowly closed. But that brought no relief. Because Alessàndro could still feel it. Everywhere. As if the colossal presence was now spread across the entire city. The hands behind the gap disappeared. The darkness began to retreat from the door. But the feeling remained. Something had been initiated. Azazel turned abruptly to Alessàndro. You cannot go. You just said it's the original point. Exactly. His voice made the entire apartment vibrate. The first gate is not a place. Silence. It is a wound. The woman closed her eyes for a moment. Like someone reliving memories they would rather forget. Entire civilizations disappeared trying to control that point. Alessàndro felt the weight of the words immediately. The first gate was not just ancient. It was prior to known history. Then a perception crossed his mind. You have been there. The woman slowly opened her eyes. She didn't deny it. Azazel turned to her. And returned incomplete. She held his gaze without fear. I still returned. The silence between the two carried eons of meaning. Ancient conflicts. Irreversible choices. Failures repeated countless times. Alessàndrho slowly approached the apartment window. And he saw. The city was wrong. Very wrong. Manaus's lights flickered in impossible patterns. Whole parts of the city plunged into darkness for seconds and returned shortly after. But not the same. He saw deformed buildings for microseconds. Streets stretching beyond normal perspective. Gigantic shadows moving between the buildings. And people. Many people standing in the streets looking at the sky. As if they had heard something. Or been called. Then he noticed something else. The sky was changing. Small circular shapes appeared behind the clouds. Eyes. Still closed. But beginning to appear. Azazel appeared next to him immediately. She is accelerating. The woman walked to the deformed apartment door. She ran her fingers over the symbols spread on the wood. The first gate began to awaken before the correct cycle. Because of me? Alessàndrho asked. She took time to answer. Because of recurrence. The word hung in the environment. Recurrence. Like an inevitable disease. Azazel turned slowly. The structure has again found a compatible pattern. Then Alessàndrho understood. He was never chosen. He was recognized. The horror of that perception opened a void within him. Because it meant that his life might never have truly been his own. The dreams. The symbols. The voices. It all began long before his birth. The woman approached him. You need to see the gate before she opens fully. What if I don't go? Azazel answered immediately. The city falls first. Silence. Then he completed. Then the rest. The entire apartment went dark again. For an absolute second, Alessàndrho saw the true structure beneath Manaus. Gigantic lines connecting thousands of consciousnesses. And at the center, something colossal pulsing beneath the city. Like a buried heart. Then the vision disappeared. The power returned. But now there was something new in the window. Reflected in the glass behind them. A silhouette. Tall. Motionless. With eyes shining within the apartment's darkness. Alessàndrho turned instantly. There was no one. But the voice came anyway. Very close. Too close. The first has already opened. Chapter 21. The City Beneath the City. The silence after the voice was broken by a deep sound coming from underground. It didn't sound like an explosion, nor a tremor. It was something organic, like the pulse of a gigantic heart hidden beneath tons of concrete. Thumb. The entire apartment vibrated. The kitchen glasses shattered simultaneously. The lights flickered red for an instant. And then, screams echoed from outside. Alessàndrho ran to the window. The scene below seemed impossible. People were standing in the middle of the street looking at the ground. Some kneeling, others crying, others completely motionless, like statues waiting for invisible instructions. Then the asphalt began to crack. Black lines appeared across the avenues of Manaus like living roots growing beneath the city. Symbols, gigantic, hidden under decades of concrete. Now awakening. Azazel appeared behind him. His presence seemed weaker, fragmented. She has begun using the subterranean grid. Grid? The woman answered. The city was built over earlier structures. She slowly approached the window. Her black eyes reflected the symbols awakening in the streets. Much earlier. Thumb. Another pulse. Stronger. The entire building tilted slightly. Alarms began to go off on all sides. Cars collided in the streets below. But there was something worse. The people weren't reacting normally. Many simply remained looking at the cracks in the ground, hypnotized, as if they were hearing something coming from the depths. Then Alessàndrho noticed. Some were drawing symbols with their own hands on the ground, compulsively, without even realizing it. Horror tightened his chest. She is calling them. Azazel closed his eyes. No. She is remembering them. The phrase destroyed any remaining sense of security. Because Alessàndrho understood immediately. The structure wasn't invading humanity. It was already inside it. Perhaps from the beginning. The phone vibrated again. New message. Beneath the first church. The woman reacted instantly. It can't be. Azazel turned slowly to her. You know where it is. She hesitated. For the first time since she had appeared. And that frightened Alessàndrho more than any creature. The first foundation of the city was built over the seal. This time the impact came with something worse. A sound. Not physical. Thousands of voices echoing simultaneously beneath the city. Singing. Low. Ancient. The people in the streets began to repeat the sounds. Without understanding. Without controlling. Like human antennas synchronizing with a buried frequency. Alessàndrho slowly moved away from the window. Blood was again running from his nose. The proximity of the structure was affecting his mind faster and faster. Then he saw something in the reflection of the off television. Not the apartment. Something else. A gigantic underground corridor illuminated by red symbols pulsing on the walls. And people walking down there. Hundreds of them. Descending. In absolute silence. The vision disappeared. But the reflection remained wrong for a few seconds. Azazel noticed immediately. She is already showing you paths. The woman grabbed Alessàndro's arm. Listen carefully. The building shook violently again. Cracks began to appear in the apartment walls. When we reached the first gate, she hesitated, as if the next words were too dangerous even to be spoken. Do not look at the center of the opening, Azazel answered immediately. He won't be able to avoid it. Then he dies. Silence. The phrase remained heavy in the environment. Cold. Direct. Alessàndrho stared at them. You have done this before, neither answered, which was answer enough. This time the entire city's lights went out at once. Manaus plunged into darkness. But not completely, because symbols began to appear beneath the streets. Glowing. Gigantic red lines forming a colossal pattern visible even from the top of buildings. A sigil buried beneath the entire city. And then, the eyes in the sky began to open. Small first. Distant. But real. Hundreds of them appearing behind the clouds. Watching the city. Watching the people. Watching him. Alessàndrho felt the structure cross his mind like an electric current. And a brutal perception was born within him. Manaus was not built over the gate. Manaus was built to hide the gate. Chapter 22, The Underground. The city was waking up. Not the people. Not the buildings. The city itself. Manaus pulsed beneath the darkness like a buried organism finally regaining consciousness. From the streets came disconnected chants. Improvised prayers. Screams. And beneath it all, the continuous sound. The hidden heart below the city continued pulsating. Alessàndrho slowly moved away from the window. The eyes in the sky increased. Now it was impossible to ignore them. Some remained closed behind the clouds. Others already watched the surface directly. And every time one of them opened, something changed in the city. A street distorted. A shadow appeared where it shouldn't exist. People suddenly stopped, as if receiving thoughts that didn't belong to them. Azazel approached the apartment's deformed door. The darkness beyond the gap had partially disappeared. The building's hallway existed again. But wrong. Too long. Lights failing at impossible distances. As if space was beginning to lose stability. We need to go down now. His voice was weaker. Fragmented across multiple tones. The woman observed the hallway in silence. Then spoke. She has already begun expanding the interior. Alessàndrho felt the meaning even before understanding the words. The structure was altering physical space. Mixing layers. Making reality compatible with it. The apartment floor vibrated so strongly that a crack crossed the entire living room. And something glowed down there. Red lines. Symbols hidden beneath the building's concrete. Azazel noticed immediately. The point below here is already active. The woman turned to Alessàndrho. Can you feel the path now? He closed his eyes for an instant. And immediately saw. Not the apartment. But a flow. Lines crossing the underground city. All converging on a single deep point beneath Manaus. Like nerves carrying information to a buried brain. He opened his eyes, gasping. I can see it. Azazel didn't look relieved. He looked worried. Very worried. Then she has already connected you to the grid. The word echoed within him. Grid. The entire city's structure functioning as a ritualistic circuit. Like a gigantic seal hidden beneath human architecture. Then someone began knocking on the neighboring apartment door. Desperately. A woman screamed from the other side of the hallway. Is anyone there? More knocks. Crying. Please! The voice stopped abruptly. Absolute silence. Then, wet sounds. Dragging. Like something being pulled across the hallway floor. Alessàndrho froze. Azazel closed his eyes. The woman only whispered. They have already begun. The apartment door handle moved on its own. Slowly. Not something trying to enter. Something trying to learn how to open again. Then a voice came from the hallway. The same woman. But wrong. Overlapped. Like several people speaking through her simultaneously. Open. The entire hallway shook. The wall next to the door began to slowly bulge. Like flesh growing beneath paint and concrete. Alessàndrho instinctively retreated. But it was already too late to ignore. Human forms began to appear beneath the wall's surface. Faces pressing against the concrete from the inside out. Eyes closed. Mouths moving. Hands trying to emerge. Azazel raised his form violently. Black shadows enveloped the apartment. Do not look directly. The faces began to open their eyes simultaneously. All completely black. The woman grabbed Alessàndrho by the arm. Let's go. She pulled him toward the hallway. Now. Are you insane? Azazel roared. If we stay here, the apartment will be assimilated. Another subterranean impact shook the building. And then, something colossal moved beneath them. The floor sank slightly. The faces in the wall smiled simultaneously. The multiple voice echoed through the concrete. The bearer descends. The structure had found them. Not just the apartment. The entire building. Perhaps the whole city. Azazel approached Alessàndrho for the last time before they opened the door. His form constantly failed now. Like a transmission losing signal. When we get close to the first gate, You will begin to remember things you never lived. The woman slowly opened the deformed door. The hallway seemed much larger than it should be. Long, dark, breathing, and at the end, many human silhouettes remained motionless watching them, waiting. Then the hallway lights went out one by one, until only darkness remained, and at its end, a single eye slowly opened. Chapter 23: The Living Hallway. The eye at the end of the hallway did not blink. It only watched. Immense. Suspended in the darkness like an open wound within space itself. Alessàndrho felt his entire body go cold. The building's hallway no longer obeyed human geometry. The walls breathed slowly. The ceiling pulsed like organic tissue. The extinguished lights continued humming even without power. And the silhouettes remained motionless, human only from a distance. Azazel advanced first. His presence spread black shadows through the hallway like liquid smoke. Don't look at the faces. The woman gripped Alessàndro's arm tightly. They perceive recognition. The phrase seemed absurd. Until he looked again at the figures. Then he understood. Their faces changed subtly, trying to look familiar. A neighbor. An old friend. People forgotten from childhood. The structure was searching for emotional patterns to facilitate approach. The entire building shook again. This time, stronger. A crack opened in the hallway floor, and a pulsing red light emerged from the depths below them. The underground heart was closer now. Much closer. The figures began to move. Slowly. Without bending their legs. They glided. Like poorly reproduced reflections trying to imitate human movement. The multiple voice echoed through the walls. The bearer returns to the axis. Azazel answered immediately. He does not belong to the structure. The entire hallway vibrated violently. The figures stopped. Then all turned their heads at the same time toward Azazel. A dry movement. Not human. Several necks broke during the movement. But they continued watching. And then, they smiled. Alessàndrho felt something enter his mind. Not words. Memories. Again. He saw gigantic underground corridors beneath ancient cities. People walking in silent lines carrying luminous symbols. Priests drawing sigils on temple foundations. And always, eyes above them, watching the rituals, waiting for the correct moment. The vision intensified. Now he was inside it, not watching, living. His hands, other hands, touched an underground wall covered in pulsing symbols. Someone spoke behind him. The opening requires continuity. Then another voice answered. And continuity requires bearers. The shock of the memory was so brutal that Alessàndrho stumbled. The woman caught him before he fell. She has already begun. Azazel turned immediately. He is synchronizing too fast. The figures in the hallway came closer. Now Alessàndrho could see details. The faces weren't fixed. They changed constantly. Hundreds of overlapping identities trying to stabilize appearance. Like fragmented consciousnesses sharing the same body. One of them stopped very close. Too close. And whispered with dozens of simultaneous voices. "We remember when you opened the sky." The memory came instantly. Violent. He saw a colossal city under a red eclipse. Thousands kneeling before a gigantic black structure. And he, or someone wearing his face, raising his hands as the sky literally opened above the city. Eyes emerging beyond reality. The crowd screaming in ecstasy. Then, the horror. The people began to fuse into each other. Bodies melting. Consciousnesses collapsing. The entire city assimilated by the structure. And at the center of it all, he realized something. That wasn't an accident. It was an attempt. Alessàndrho returned from the vision violently gasping. Blood was running from his eyes now. Azazel approached quickly. "You need to block the memories." "I can't." His voice echoed through the living hallway. And immediately, all the figures froze. Absolute silence. Even the underground heart seemed to stop for a second. Then the eye at the end of the hallway moved. Slowly. Focusing directly on Alessàndrho. And the reality around began to deform. The walls moved apart. The hallway expanded infinitely. The building disappeared. Now there was only the hallway. Without beginning. Without end. And footsteps began to sound behind them. Many. Hundreds. Alessàndrho turned slowly. People were walking toward them from the darkness. Residents of the building. But not completely. Black eyes. Delayed movements. Symbols glowing beneath the skin. The woman whispered. "The entire city is beginning to hear." Then a child appeared among the residents. Small. Motionless. Her face partially covered by shadows. She slowly raised her head toward Alessàndrho. And spoke with the colossal voice. "The first gate is open beneath you." Chapter 24. The Descent. The child remained motionless in the impossible hallway. Small. Silent. But the presence within her made the entire space vibrate. The residents behind her remained aligned in crooked rows, like puppets waiting for invisible instructions. And all watched Alessàndrho. Without blinking. The gigantic eye at the end of the hallway remained open. Waiting. The woman pulled Alessàndrho violently by the arm. "Don't listen anymore." But it was already too late. because the colossal voice continued echoing within him, not through sound, through memories themselves. You opened the first path. The hallway deformed again. The walls began to move apart like flesh being torn. And then, the floor shook. A crack opened beneath their feet. Deep, red, gigantic symbols pulsed down there like living organs buried beneath the building. Azazel noticed first. She will not wait any longer. The figures of the residents began to walk simultaneously, without running, without hurry. Like an inevitable ritual. Synchronized footsteps echoed through the living hallway. The child remained still, watching. Then she smiled slowly. Descend. The floor gave way. Not completely, but enough. The crack expanded violently across the hallway. Concrete breaking. Pipes exploding, dust filling the air, and below them, there was too much space. Much more space than should exist beneath an ordinary building. Alessàndrho looked down and immediately wished he hadn't. Gigantic structures existed beneath the city. Black columns. Impossible staircases. Symbols pulsing on underground walls. An architecture much older than Manaus. Much older than any known civilization. The woman closed her eyes for an instant. Like someone reliving trauma. She has already rebuilt part of the axis. Azazel turned abruptly. That's impossible. Not for her. Another underground pulse. Stronger. Now Alessàndrho could feel it directly in his bones. As if the buried heart was synchronizing his body to the structure. The figures of the residents came closer. Some no longer maintained stable human form. Lengthened arms. Skin opening into living symbols. Eyes emerging beneath flesh. But all walked in absolute silence. Like faithful before an altar. The child slowly raised one hand and pointed to the crack. The bearer must descend before the total opening. Azazel exploded in violent shadows. The entire hallway darkened. The creatures retreated a few steps. But only a few. He is no longer the same. The child tilted her head. Her neck bent beyond the human limit. But she continued smiling. He never was. The phrase cut through Alessàndrho like a blade. Because part of him believed it immediately. The memories. The cycles. The recurrences. Perhaps his entire life had only been a continuity of something much older. The woman slowly approached the crack. The red symbols reflected in her black eyes. The first gate lies below the original foundation. Far below, Alessàndrho approached the opening. And then he heard it. Chants. thousands of them, coming from the depths. Human, but not entirely. Like ancient voices trying to reproduce modern language. Among the sounds, words began to emerge. Opening. Return. Continuity. The entire building tilted violently. The hallway walls began to collapse. The human structure could no longer sustain the altered space. Azazel turned to Alessàndrho. His form constantly failed now. Entire parts disappeared and returned. When we reached the gate, silence. For the first time there was something like guilt in his voice. You will see what really happened. The woman looked directly at Azazel. And perhaps you will finally understand what you did. The shadows around Azazel trembled. But he didn't answer. The crack widened even more. Now it was possible to see a gigantic staircase descending into the depths below the city. Black steps. Ancient. Marked by symbols identical to the sigil. And there were people down there. Many. Descending slowly toward the darkness. Residents of the city. Called by the structure. Alessàndrho felt the void grow within his chest. Because he understood something terrible. The opening wasn't beginning. It had been happening for a long time. And the entire city had been prepared for this moment. Then the hallway lights died completely. Everything plunged into absolute darkness. Except one thing. Down there. In the underground depths. A gigantic red eye slowly opened at the center of the staircase. Chapter 25. The Buried Axis. The underground eye opened completely. Gigantic. Red. Pulsing in the depths below the city like a buried sun watching through the stone. And then, it looked back. Directly at Alessàndrho. The impact was immediate. The voices disappeared. The hallway vanished. The building ceased to exist. For an absolute instant, there was only consciousness. His. And the structures. Alessàndrho saw lines crossing the entire planet. Not cities. Civilizations. Points buried beneath deserts, oceans, mountains, and forgotten ruins. All connected. All pulsing at the same frequency. And at the center of the network. The first gate. Not only beneath Manaus, but beneath human perception itself. Then the vision broke violently. The hallway returned. The crack remained open. The human figures now knelt around it in ritualistic silence. The child still watched. But something had changed. Her skin was beginning to crack. As if the presence within her was too large for that body to sustain. Azazel held Alessàndrho before he fell. She has already connected you to the central axis. Blood ran from Alessàndro's mouth. He could barely keep his thoughts organized. The memories kept coming. Fast. Uncontrollable. He saw ancient men digging gigantic tunnels beneath forests. He saw symbols being carved into stone long before the first religions. He saw entire cities built around underground points. And always the same intention: to contain, not invoke. To contain. The woman realized the instant he understood. Now you are beginning to remember correctly. The underground impact was so strong that part of the hallway simply disappeared. Not collapsed. Disappeared. Replaced by pulsing darkness. The kneeling people began to murmur simultaneously. The axis breathes. The gate remembers. Continuity returns. The voice came from them. But it also came from below. And also from inside his head. Azazel looked at the staircase in the depths. Violent shadows trembled around his form. She is too close to the surface. The woman answered without looking away from the abyss. Because someone weakened the seals. Silence. Heavy. Then Alessàndrho slowly turned to Azazel. And for the first time, he suspected him. Azazel noticed immediately. His presence oscillated. Unstable. You don't understand what happened. Then explain it to me. The child began to laugh. Low. Broken. The skin on her face slowly opened into glowing black lines. He can't. Another pulse. Now coming from within the walls. The symbols in the hallway began to move like living organisms. Climbing up the legs of the kneeling people. Entering beneath their skin. They didn't react. They continued smiling. The woman quickly approached Alessàndrho. Listen carefully. Her black eyes trembled slightly now. As if even she was losing stability near the axis. The first gate was never opened by accident. Azazel turned violently. No. But she continued. Someone believed they could control the structure. The memories exploded inside Alessàndrho immediately. An ancient city. Underground temples. Gigantic symbols forming circuits beneath the streets. And at the center, Azazel. Not as an entity. Human. Or something close to it. Conducting rituals before the first gate. The shock was brutal. Alessàndrho staggered back. Azazel advanced immediately. That didn't happen the way you saw it. But the woman answered. The structure never shows exactly what we want to hide. The child began to walk slowly toward the crack. Her entire body was failing now. Arms lengthening. Eyes appearing beneath her skin. Her voice becoming choral. The guardian failed. The kneeling people repeated immediately. The guardian failed. Azazel exploded in violent shadows. The entire hallway shook. Silence. But the structure was already responding. The depths below the city began to emit red light through the cracks. And then, Something began to climb the underground staircase. Slow. Gigantic. It wasn't possible to see its complete form. Only fragments. Eyes. Impossible limbs. Living symbols pulsing over dark flesh. The kneeling people began to cry with joy. The child opened her arms. She has sent a herald. The woman held Alessàndrho tightly. For the first time. There was true desperation in her. If he reaches the surface, the sky opens. End of the first part.